Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. It's not actually 8th Air Force Week. It's one show this week, but the titles work anyway. Anyway, joining us today is Sean O'Dwyer, Education Programs Manager of the National Museum of the Mighty 8th Air Force, to look at one bomb group through the point of view of 3 of the airmen who were in it. And of course, the links to the museum are in the description below. So if you happen to be the other side of the Atlantic, or if you're from this side, but you're going that side, definitely a place worth going to. I'll bring him in now. Good afternoon, Sean. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me, Paul.
I'm glad you're here. So we were talking before going live about the 8th Air Force is in some ways like people's entry level to understanding the air formations of World War II. It's the one everybody can talk about. It's the one where the insignia, I know they're all just numbers on a blue background, but it kind of is recognizable. What's your role at the museum now? I mean, I said it there, and how did you get to be there, and where did your interest come from?
Yeah, gosh. Well, I'll try to summarize it here. So I've been fascinated with history and especially World War II for as long as I can remember. I'm sure many people here can relate to that. I grew up, as I like to joke, in the retirement capital of the world. Where else but Florida in the U.S. And where so many of these people from the World War II generation, came to retire, for their last years. And once I kind of got a sense of history, I picked up a few books. So, no surprise, some of the first books were on D-Day, right? Gets a lot of attention this side of the pond too. But I thought, I'd like to talk to someone who was there. Once I kind of got the chronology down, and then I realized, well, hang on, this is 10, 15 years ago when more of these people, this generation was alive. I could just go down to any given VFW post, Veterans of Foreign Wars post, that is. American Legion, retirement communities, even neighbors living independently in my hometown, and talk to them. And I kind of just expand out from there, really started to do more in-depth research into their lives, and also friends of theirs, who didn't make it home, the ones who never got to tell their stories. And about 3 years ago, I was able to, get the job here at the museum. I've been past it, I don't even know how many times over the years, because here in Pooler, Georgia, near Savannah. And I started off in events, which I enjoy the energy of events, but I always found that education, getting to lead tours of all ages was my calling. So I get to do that every day, and it's just about a dream come true to get to do that day in and day out.
Brilliant. And we can maybe dive in a little deeper to how a museum is explaining the history of the 8th Air Force in an environment when the veterans generation is mostly gone, because we'll get into presentation in a minute, but I find it's increasingly hard to kind of relate to just lists of dates. And bomb group arrived at, this squadron formed at, because and I have on my shelf the fantastic Roger Freeman books that were my kind of inroad to this years and years ago. But ultimately what keeps people interested is human life stories, and that's that thing that the 8th Air Force, in a weird way, because of the way crews worked, is you don't sort of have that linear continuity of here's Jim in 1941 when he starts flying, and here's Jim in 45, because it just still didn't really work that way. So I'll be interested to know how you convey that, because I've done shows just recently. Michaela, when she was on, my great grandfather did 7 missions. So it's right. which was amazing, but it doesn't connect with someone like me who follows foot sloggers. The guys who basically fight their way from North Africa all the way across Sicily and up there, Italy. It doesn't connect that kind of storytelling with someone whose war can essentially be, less than weeks total of hours in the danger zone. But anyway, we can get into that later on. So I will bring up your slides. And folks, please fire away with questions if you have them. If you've got any big, broad questions about strategic bombing or Sean's work in the museum, we'll do those ones towards the end. But any kind of detailed ones you want clarification, we'll do them as we go along. I'm going to hand over to Sean to take us through this. So over to you, sir.
Great, thank you. So again, National Museum of the Mighty 8th Air Force it's in Pooler, Georgia, about 20 minutes west of Savannah. Exit 102 on Interstate 95 for those of you guys who are in our vicinity, or even if you aren't, come on over. I've talked to some good friends across the pond who have made a couple trips over here. But we are the only museum in the United States dedicated to the 8th Air Force's legacy in World War II, telling both the bomb and fighter groups as well as the other support units, many support units of the 8th Air Force. We were founded in 1996 by the veterans of the 8th. They actually had started to scout out a site in the 1980s. And the namesake of our rotunda, basically the main entrance where you come into the museum, General Lewis Lyle, he commanded the 303rd and the 379th Bomb Groups. He was a full bird colonel at 26 or 27 years old. I mean, that's just exceptional. Had the most missions out of any 8th Air Force airman, I should say 8th Air Force pilot that we know of, somewhere over 80, because he would kind of do this sort of thing on mission 24, 25, or pilots that were getting jumpy and would take their place and leave their name on the roster. So they got the credit, went home, unofficial tally. So he had 69 confirmed, but we believe over 80 with those kind of unofficial ones.
Crikey. Yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah, you're on borrowed time after about 12 missions in that era. Let alone, 25, 50, 70. Anyway, so he and others were, driving force. The 8th Air Force Historical Society is kind of how these people stay connected. Also, your group associations, bomb and fighter groups primarily. And they want a home, to honor, of course, the service of the 8th, but most importantly, first and foremost, the ones who didn't come home. 26,000 members of the 8th Air Force did not return. It's just astronomical, the cost. And we have, again, a couple of incredible displays. I mean, tons of A2 jackets. We're going on Aviation here soon, where we will be redoing our exhibits. We've been here since 1996. We turned 30 this year, which is very exciting. But, we need, we could use an update in the areas. So that's coming. So by 2028, we expect those to be installed. To my understanding, there will be an A2 jacket gallery because we have many in the collection. Beautiful. Again, the bomber jackets everybody calls, but they were issued to all air crew, whether they were in bombers, fighters, cargo, etc. And we have B17 Flying Fortress in the livery of the city of Savannah. This one is one of 45 full airframes left in the entire world. So a very rare bird indeed. And on the top right corner, that is our Memorial Gardens that abuts Interstate 95. And I highly encourage for anyone who hasn't been, if you are in this area around Memorial Day, and the latter part of May, we have what's called Flags for the Fallen, where in honor of those who died in service with the 8th Air Force, we put 26,048 star flags in the gardens to commemorate the 8th airmen who didn't come home. It is an awesome sight to see. And we have all through the weekend. It's again, I highly encourage anyone who is in the area or is willing just to make the trip.
You need a World War II YouTuber from Normandy for any reason over there, because that sounds really good.
I think you would really thoroughly enjoy it. Yeah. I mean, we've had also veterans, as few as are left, at these up through this past Flags for the Fallen, and God willing, we'll have some more in this upcoming one. So yeah, I mean, obviously we want to carry on that history as long as we can, the living side of that history. So that's a little bit about the museum. Again, I'm a bit biased, but I think anyone here who has even a vague interest in World War II will get a lot out of a visit here.
Right. Moving on. Yep.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah, I guess I'm so used to doing myself. Well, because I can also control it from this.
Yeah, you can do it. Yeah, just right, left, and right arrows if we want to. Yeah, or I can do it. Either way. It's good.
Okay, great. So okay, getting into it. So my presentation, Robert, Erwin, and Richard, a story of famous favorite few, focuses on 3 airmen of the 92nd Bomb Group, which was nicknamed Fame's Favorite Few. Many of these groups had all kinds of monikers. The 92nd, theirs was Fame's Favorite Few, which I think is just a spot on, great nickname. So there is a memorial in Forchet-le-Marche, Belgium, a little bit south of the capital of Brussels, dedicated to 2 crews of the 92nd. And while you find these, I think, very often, certainly has been my experience, these sorts of memorials on the ground in France, in Belgium, in the Netherlands, elsewhere, that are dedicated to the ground forces, your infantry units that were fighting in that area. It's a little bit less common that you see this for air crew, at least for a couple of specific crews. You might have some that kind of talk generally about the contributions of the 8th and the 9th Air Force, which was a tactical side, tactical Air Force working most closely in conjunction with the 8th. So why is this one here? Well, to zoom out a little bit, the 8th Air Force, reason actually the museum is here is because it was formed in Savannah, Georgia, January 28th, 1942. About 20 minutes from where I am now, where the museum is, in downtown Savannah, just south of Forsyth Park, one of the prettiest places in town, there's an American Legion post, 135. And way back in 1942, it was the armory for the National Guard's unit, the Chatham Artillery. Chatham County is where we are. It traces its lineage directly back to the Revolutionary War, and with some elements tracing all the way back to the Georgia Colonial Militia under General James Oglethorpe. So we're talking about an old unit. And on that day in 42, 7 officers got together and formed the 8th Air Service Command with 0 aircraft. It was just to stand up on paper, just to say that it was formed and we're going to, build up our force. And so, again, just down the road from us is where that all happened. And to put this in context, right, we're attacked December 7th, 1941 at Pearl Harbor, but also almost simultaneously all across the Pacific realm, right? The Japanese Empire. They very quickly, just hours later, were attacking Guam and Malaya, and making some treks in the Dutch East Indies and Hong Kong, all over, and also the Philippines. So we're reeling from our losses at Pearl Harbor, where over 2,400 Americans lost their lives, and we are, as the 8th Air Force is formed, the U.S. is losing, along with its, the Philippine Army allies, its fight in the Philippines, right? So it is a bleak time for this unit to come into being. But they recognize that we're going to have to take the fight over, and that's exactly what they did. Their primary mission was the strategic precision daylight bombing of the Nazi war machine. So strategic, we're talking about big picture, hitting the means of making war. The factories are producing, all the tanks, aircraft, guns, everything. The refineries that are fueling those weapons of war, railroad yards that are transporting them, ball bearings, plants, all manner of other targets. And they mostly stuck to that strategic role. A couple times they were in a tactical role was on D-Day and the Battle of the Bulge, among other points, when they were supporting the troops directly on the ground, like the 9th Air Force was doing, which was a designated tactical air force doing airstrike, close air support. Precision, one of the most contentious parts, obviously, of the 8th Air Force's history, and generally strategic bombing. Precision, the stated goal was to hit strictly military targets. Ostensibly, that was what they were aiming for. But obviously, they were hampered by a number of factors, most notably the technology of the era, right? The Norden bomb sight, as groundbreaking as it was in some senses, it's not like it was all that accurate. What was considered accurate for the 8th Air Force was if bombs landed within 1,000 feet of the aiming point. That was considered, essentially on target. And also weather, right? Weather was a constant enemy, second only to the Germans after them to the 8th. And I've read that, if memory serves me correctly, when they had to opt for radar bombing, right? Essentially, just if it was clouded over, right? They could not see through the overcast, and they were permitted to bomb using radar methods, Pathfinder methods. In other words, they had about 4.4% accuracy rate at best. That was according to statistical surveys done, of course, after the war. But that was at least the stated goal of the 8th. Daylight, I think maybe this might be one of the second most contentious aspect, because daylight, right? Yeah, they're bombing during the day, but I don't think I really realized this until just a few years ago, really, that the round-the-clock bombing campaign, the combined bomber offensive between the U.S. bombing during the day and the Brits at night, that didn't come. That wasn't the plan, from the start by Roosevelt and Churchill. That came because of a split in doctrine of how they were going to prosecute their war. Right, the Brits started off doing daytime bombing missions. I think it was Heligoland Bight early in the war, where there was a number of their medium bombers that were lost, and they pretty much abandoned any sizable daytime raids after that. And especially, when the Germans are subjecting them to night after night of bombing during the Blitz. Guys like Arthur Harris, Bomber Harris, as he was more often known, head of RAF Bomber Command, he essentially looked at it, well, if it's German, it's a target. I mean, they did it to us after all, we're just going to pay it back in kind. And obviously very controversial, but that was essentially where, very briefly, where his thinking settled. And in the U.S., right, we had a different outlook on it, but it kind of just so happened that you had this round-the-clock bombing. It was not the idea from the start. And they thought, I think it's fair to say, Brits thought we were crazy for bombing in broad daylight. So now altogether, the 8th Air Force would come to number 40 bomb groups and 18 fighter groups, the largest of all the 16 numbered air forces that the U.S. Army Air Forces put together. 350,000 men and women were served through its ranks over the course of the war.
I think one of the things that you're kind of hinting at is some of the later formed numbered air forces kind of came out sort of ready to go, because there had to be a learning process, even though the theaters change and the aircraft change. But the whole point of strategic bombing was that it was evolution, not revolution. There's an idea out of the 1930s. The bomber will always get through, that kind of thing. And people are already saying in the sidebar, which is some of the theorists hadn't kind of considered North European weather as a part of it. They hadn't considered an enemy that would have the resources they had to deal, the flak, the fighter response, et cetera, et cetera. And so it all becomes a process of evolution. When we had Stuart Green on recently talking about the hospitals in the UK, as you will come to later, that it starts off, you could fit the entire 8th Air Force in the back of one van, couldn't you? At one point, it's like 4 guys go off an air. That's it. You're the 8th Air Force. And everything had to be developed. And Bomber Command are doing a very similar thing, really. It's by the end of the war, there's sort of a doctrine in place, but they've been writing it and rewriting it as they go along.
That's the thing is, pardon the pun, it was on the fly, right? This was a pretty much untested doctrine. I mean, the closest that you had, because you have some Italian thinkers, the name's escaping me. I'm trying to remember the one who was really a big advocate for strategic bombing and bomber development.
I know what you mean, but I can't think either.
Yeah, going back to the First World War. But really, it was Spain. It was the Spanish Civil War, where you had anything approaching prior, obviously, to War II. What maybe strategic bombing, what it would look like in the next war. And again, it's still. It's very different because obviously they didn't have as large bombers then, and the Germans did not invest ultimately hardly anything into their strategic bombing force. It was pretty much all your versatile but tactical bombers, right? Heinkel HE-111s and Ju-88s, and others kind of serving in these sort of dual capacities, because that was what their doctrine was calling for. So we're, both the U.S. and the British are kind of, if you will, writing the rules. So now early on this, obviously a key part of the 8th Air Force's just how they operated was combat box formation, developed by General Curtis LeMay. Obviously, a member of the bomber mafia, had been an advocate for this for some time, kind of a disciple of many of these, these previous thinkers. Your Billy Mitchells, again, I can't remember the Italian thinker's name. I'm sure someone here in the chat will probably say.
Yeah, Giulio Douay.
Douay, yes, that's it. Thank you, Chad. So that became standard by mid-1943, and it was twofold aim, right, to have hopefully increased bombing accuracy by clustering these bombers closer together, that you get better bomber patterns. Basic, but essentially sound thinking that, well, yeah, you have them closer together, they are going to ultimately fall closer together. Just how close, again, the bombing surveys, would tell afterwards. But also to maximize defensive firepower. These Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators, they're bristling with machine guns. And in the era before they had their escort, they're using Spitfires and P-47s, and they got to break off maybe a little ways onto the continent. The idea is, well, we cluster them closer together. That's a less enticing target for your German interceptors. And they typically divided into 3 to 4 squadrons. Early in the war, it was a lead squadron, a high squadron, and a low squadron. And later on, they did have a low squadron for these maximum effort missions, when they basically were fielding pretty much every flyable aircraft for a mission. And obviously, things, reality set in pretty quickly as the 8th Air Force got going. They flew their first mission August 17th of 42. The entire force was 12 B-17s bombing the marshalling yards at Rouen, France. The pilot of the lead plane, Butcher Shop, was none other than Major Paul Tibbets, who, of course, would later fly the Enola Gay, command the 509th Composite Group, carried out the atomic bombings. His first combat service, as well as that of his bombardier, Thomas Farabee, and his navigator, Theodore Dutch Van Kirk, was with the 8th Air Force. And so when they started, right, in this very early point in the 8th Air Force service, there was not a set mission count. There was not a mission quota. They did not have that worked out yet. And they kind of arrived at that 25 mission number. It was a bit arbitrary. I mean, they were looking at, again, they were strategic bombing, and certainly, just the air war was so mathematical. And there were various factors that I guess had them settle on 25, but it was pretty arbitrary. So in that early part of the war, when they had to fly 25 missions, your odds across the 8th Air Force were only about 1 in 3 of completing that tour of 25. Now, the other 2 of the 3 were not all killed. Many were, but many more also were either shot down and captured, wounded, and sent home, shot down, escaped, and evaded the Germans with the help of resistance networks, and were taken off of flying duty because the high likelihood of them being shot down again. They didn't want them to actually divulge any sense of information, about their contacts, safe houses, routes for escape, and interrogation. And so really when the combined bomber offensive began and kicked off in the summer of 43, that's when you start to see these losses rise precipitously. And that was no more true than at the Second Schweinfurt raid, October 14th, 1943. I was very fortunate to actually do a recent phone interview with a surviving veteran, Roland Martin. He's 102. And he was with the 379th Bomb Group. He was a 19-year-old B-17 pilot, which even for that era was exceptionally young. And just under 300 planes took part, and 60 of them were shot down, including Roland's. Fortunately, the entire crew got out, but his plane was hit at about 18,000 feet by one burst of 3 shells that knocked out 2 of his engines, and another burst of 3 shells almost immediately afterwards that knocked out his other 2 engines. And so he was essentially flying a glider, although he said it was more like a rock that was falling. And back half of the crew bailed out. He took the plane all the rest of the way down, crash landed with about half of the crew still remaining. I think one of either the navigator or bombardier had bailed out earlier, but about 4 of the crew were still aboard. Evaded the Germans for 2 weeks and was taken prisoner, held for 20 months as a POW at Solid Luft 1. So again, that's just to use. I always like to obviously tell these personal stories. I'll get more into that's the stories that are namesake of my presentation here shortly, but it gives a bit more. I think it gives an important layer to these numbers that are so abstract. You talk about 291 bombers on this raid, and 60 of them are shot down. Well, each of those bombers has 10 men aboard. And this was right after they had experienced some severe losses 2 months before, bombing the same target, plus the Regensburg aircraft manufacturing plants. They lost 60 on that day. So to really illustrate those losses, this is from Williamson Murray's excellent study on the defeat of Luftwaffe. So this tracks the losses of the 8th Air Force in 43. So there's for each month, January to December. The taller dotted bar graph is the number of available crews at that during that particular month. Right, you see how small it was to start. I mean, that's 85 across all of East Anglia. That's hardly anything. And the striped one bar next to it is the losses that they sustained over the course of that month. And again, you see, like I mentioned, in the summer of 43, those losses rising exponentially, approaching 40%. And things started to taper off. I mean, we're only down to, in September, 20% losses of the total crews available, which is still just astronomical, given any standard World War II or otherwise. And then, of course, October, you see a spike again at 37.4%, in large part because of Black Thursday, the name given by these airmen to the Second Triumphant Raid, but also a period called Black Week from October 8th to October 14th, when the 8th Air Force lost over 120 bombers in basically a week's time.
And people are asking about what could be expected in terms of losses, but I'm going to assume that they have no idea. There's no precedent. There's no data to draw on. You've just got to, coming out of 42, you've just got to start flying missions and basically see what happens. They can only know so much in advance. They've, as you say, they've worked out the box system. They've got machine guns in the aircraft. They've trained the guys, but you've got to just eventually just take off in large numbers and see how it happens. I mean, in the middle of this, it's that kind of like the happy time in the Battle of the Atlantic. It gets to the crisis point. It gets to like, we can't continue with this. If this carries on at the worst rate, there'll be nobody left by the end of the year. So it's that time of the war. We know as historians that the shift in power had turned, sort of on a big scale. The Germans are sort of starting to lose the war, even after early 42 in some ways. But it doesn't feel like it when we look at that chart, does it?
Right. That's the thing I think what a lot of people forget is, of course, we've fought already a hard campaign in North Africa. At this point, we're talking, let's say October 43. We've just gotten onto the boot of Italy, right? And it's a month after Salerno, bloody Salerno. It's not going well. It's the soft underbelly is not exactly as it had been made out to be. And they had to reassess things because at this point the 8th Air Force's mission was not feasible as envisioned. Right? I mean, that 25 number really, I think part of that also comes from that essentially they were combat exhausted. Anyone who made it that far was considered just too battle fatigued to continue on. So that's the thing is it was a bleak time to be coming into this. And when I talked to Roland, again, that veteran who was shot down in 2nd Schweinfurt, I asked him, could you tell me about that day, the lead up, not just the mission itself, but when you got into that briefing room and they unfurled, took down the sheet covering the target and the route that day. He said, yeah. So when we walked in, still pretty green pilots, this 10th mission, was getting on, wasn't totally green, but still a newer crew, replacement crew. And he said, whenever they took that sheet down, there were some guys who remembered this first Schweinfurt mission just a couple months prior, right? Because we were only going back to hit it again because, it had done quite a bit of damage, but we wanted to deal, quote unquote, a killing blow, essentially. And so that's why they were essentially calling on to hit the ball bearings plant there again. And he said these guys who remembered first Schweinfurt, who had been on it, or at least had known guys who were on it, maybe didn't come back. He said they tried to walk out of the room. They were like, "Oh boy, this is what we're in for." I mean, it was just already so known by then how bleak the circumstances were, and that you could expect for certain targets. Oh, this is absolutely going to be a rough one. Are there any other questions, by the way? Because I kind of zoom a little bit more. We were getting closer to the actual discussion about the crew.
No, because they're answering amongst themselves. I mean, we had the comment that which is pertinent to my point about the fact that the situation is changing, is that the Germans are hemorrhaging fighters as well. I mean, that's the thing. They're, in order to do the damage they're doing against the 8th Air Force in the day and Bomber Command at night, they are hemorrhaging their aircraft. And we've got Stuart Burbridge in the sidebar as well, who's written about the war on night fighters, things like that. So, but your mate who you interviewed didn't realize, he's not being told, well, don't worry, there are slightly less German fighters actually now this month, right? Because they don't know that. And I think that's we're not that we're going into discussing Masters of the Air, but that's one of the things that series I think conveys very well, is the early period was fraught with many difficulties, none of which were the fault of the crews who were doing their best and trained to the correct standard, etc. It's just that the odds were against them. It's just flying into a maelstrom of death. But you're answering most things as we go along. So let's carry on. Fantastic stuff.
Great. So, and obviously, I'm sure everyone knows here, the difference maker was ultimately fighter escort, right? I mean, so coupled with the losses of German aircraft, right? They are losing a lot of aircraft, but probably most importantly, they are losing pilots. They are losing highly experienced pilots, and their training regimen was much more, maybe selective is a word, than the U.S. Right? We had great pilots, and it really got to I think a pretty good place by latter part of the war. But by that point, of course, we had a surplus of pilots. The Germans, they're just not able to replace the same losses for a whole litany of factors, right? In defense of the Reich. So the P-47 Thunderbolt and Spitfires, again, they can carry these bombers a little ways onto the continent, and with some added fuel, drop tanks, giving them extra fuel range, a bit further still. And conveniently, the P-38 equipped with drop tanks only comes around in use in November of '43, in direct response to Black Week and Second Schweinfurt in particular. And by spring, summer '44, right, the P-51 is not totally replacing, but for the most part replacing the P-47 Thunderbolt on these fighter escort missions, and taking them pretty much to any target that the 8th Air Force had in their general area of operations. So the 92nd Bomb Group, again, one of just 40 of these bomb groups in the 8th Air Force, but they were the oldest B-17 outfit in Europe at that point. There were some that preceded them just barely. 97th Bomb Group, one of them, was the one that carried out that very first raid in August of '42. But they were the oldest one that still remained in Europe, right, flying out of East Anglia. 97th moved on later to North Africa, and then, of course, to the 15th Air Force in Italy. So they were with the 12th Air Force in North Africa. Don't want to forget those other Mediterranean air forces. They flew, of course, among the most just because of their early arrival, 308 missions, including some of the toughest missions. Second Schweinfurt, there was, if memory serves me correctly, 18 bomb groups that took part in that. And again, 60 bombers shot down. 6 of those were just from the 92nd. So 10% of the losses were from one group. In fact, they were part of the 40th Combat Wing, which comprised the 92nd, 305th, and the 306 bomb groups. And they suffered 29 of the 60 losses. 3 bomb groups out of 18, again, I believe it was 18, suffered just under half of the entire losses. And the 305th had the worst of it. They lost 13 bombers over Schweinfurt one day. Now, of course, 92nd, like many, were decorated with the Distinguished Unit Citation, now the Presidential Unit Citation for one mission. Oschersleben, the January 11th Oschersleben mission produced a number of DUCs for both bomb and some fighter groups. But they were flying through some intense opposition, both flak and fighters. And they paid for it dearly. 800 airmen were lost either as a result of combat or accidents with the 92nd. And 154 B-17s lost in the process. I think it was just under half, roughly half of the entire force of total of B-17s assigned to the 92nd were lost. So now to zoom in to the focus of this presentation, the Schmidt crew, 327th Bomb Squadron, 92nd Bomb Group. So on the left is the roster of the crew as of March 3rd, 1945. And it has their, of course, names, positions, and ages listed. The old man in the outfit was Cletus Brown Navigator, 27 years old. Pilot Erwin Schmidt was all of 21 years old. 4 of his crew were 19 years old. And when the crew actually initially formed, that's a picture of them on the right. They don't fully correspond to those on the left because oftentimes bomber crews would rotate out. They would have people filling different positions on an as-need basis, especially gunners. So if they were short with this crew, we need an extra gunner. Okay, well, this one's not flying today. You're assigned to them. Happened a lot. But when they formed the crew, they had an average age, according to the calculus of one of the crew members, of 20.1 years, officers included. By end of the war, it was about 22 years old was the average age of these bomber crews. And that's a picture of them at actually Chatham Field, Georgia, which is now Savannah Hilton Head International Airport, right around the corner from the museum. It was used actually as an operational training unit base where they would do their last bit of, actually form a crew and do the crew training before heading overseas. Now, the flight engineer on that crew was Robert Deignan, born 1925 in Bloomfield, Wisconsin. He was one of the 19-year-olds on the crew. And he was, I'm sure many of you noticed, they were from B-24. They trained on B-24s. All their foreign crew training was on 24s, but they were assigned to the 92nd, which was a 17 outfit, strictly B-17s. So he, as a flight engineer and top turret gunner, top turret gun, I think there were some nominal differences between the 24s and the 17s. Gun configuration, I think it was very, pretty uniform. But as a flight engineer, I mean, that's quite elite. Because a 24, right? I mean, it was a bit of a notorious beast. They call it the boxcar with wings for a number of reasons. It was known to be a more difficult plane to fly, but also it did have a couple of advantages. It could fly higher, it could fly faster, and it could carry a heavier bomb load. Actually, not higher. I think it was actually, it had a longer range, excuse me. But there were some advantages that I had. But Jimmy Doolittle, commander of the 8th Air Force by this point, he had a stated preference for B-17s. For whatever reason, 2/3 of the bomb groups, again, were B-17s, 1/3 were B-24s. So imagine, right, you're assigned to this group and you've worked with one plane and then you don't see any of them in sight when you get to RAF Podington, the home of the 92nd. Imagine, what your surprise would be. And so he had logged 17 missions by March 3rd of 45, and against regulations, he actually kept a combat log for his first 11 missions. And I think ostensibly the stated reason why they didn't want them keeping these logs was, for any German spies, anything to get fed to the Germans, for that they'd hear over Lord Ha Ha or Axis Sally's, broadcast. I think there was some basic truth to that, but really, I think it was more an issue of keeping up morale, right? The mail was censored. This was not. So they could actually be very honest with how close they came to maybe being shot down. And I think that was, really more the reason why High Command discouraged.
I've heard that with bomber crew, bomber command squadron commanders, suggesting people don't keep diaries, because if you start thinking as you're writing down, you're allowing those thoughts to enter in your head. If you start doing the math there, go, oh, hang on, I've done 5 of these, and on 2 of them, my friends got shot down. You just don't think about it. I mean, it's all easy for me to say that from the benefit of 82 years later, but you can understand why at the time, allowing people, because diaries and a solo, you do it on your own. There's no sort of people around you keeping you from thinking about the negative side of things. So I can understand why they'd have been pretty bleak. 8th Air Force diaries in 1943 would have been pretty full of loss of friends.
Exactly. And the thing is, right, these guys are getting to the group in late 44. They have full fighter escort, right? The nature of the air war has changed in a big way.
Yeah.
But still, for one reason or another, about 15 to 20% of crewmen in the 8th were not finishing their tours. I mean, that's still not great odds. I mean, again, it's much better than it had been previously, but I always make a point to say,
but the legacy's still there, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, the people who serve you the beers in the butt, this concept that hasn't gone away. The ground crews who've been servicing the aircraft of 15 different crews over the last 2 years, they're kind of allowing you to enter in the understanding of what the losses have been like. So just because, I don't talk about it in my normally, out on a normally trips, just because someone tells you that things are better now. It was last week was really terrible. This week's better now. You don't necessarily take that on board until you've had real practical proof of the fact things are better. So yeah, it takes a long time to recover morale. I would imagine, even if there's this change of personnel, the legacy is there, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. That's the thing is they're hearing by this point about the losses. At least it's not. It wasn't like it wasn't reported. They've seen as they're training. I mean, basically the middle of their training is when they're seeing like, oh boy, I'm sure at least some of them are thinking, what have I got myself into? This is the kind of losses we're sustaining. So I actually came to know Robert's story first out of all the crewmen, because I worked prior to the Mighty 8th. I worked at the Motorsports Hall of Fame down in Daytona Beach, Florida, near my hometown, and always been a bit of a gearhead, so it was a pretty great place to be too. But I got to talking with a coworker of mine, Lee, Robert's grandniece, and we just got in a chat about history. Right, with a geek like me, it doesn't take long for it to turn to World War II, and she told me about her family's World War II story, and Robert in particular. And like a lot of families, she was interested in it, but she's like, but I don't really know where to start. I'm not really read in on all the squadrons, groups, and everything. It's a bit of it's a lot to wrap your head around. I know the basics, but I'd like to learn more. I said, sure, I'd be happy to look into it. Do you have anything that can help me get started on this? And lo and behold, they still have his combat diary over 8 decades later. Just amazing. I mean, just because I love, obviously, personal stories is what makes history. But this is just such an incredible window into, just one airman's life serving with them. And he even mentions there that he had made the transition from 24s to 17s, but for each of the missions that he kept up on, because he didn't get to log all of them. I think that was partly because of the tempo of the missions they were flying. On one page, you'll have the Stars and Stripes articles for that day's mission. Now, on the other side, he's got the mission information, which number it was, date, target, bomb load, that sort of thing. And then his own unvarnished thoughts on the mission itself. And I love this quote. I think it is so emblematic of that wartime generation, at least what we certainly kind of think of when we think of this group of people. I have but one aim, and that is to be the best damned engineer in the 8th Air Force. He was gung-ho, like so many were. Now, one of his other missions, mission number 6, was January 28th, 1945. It happened to be the 3rd birthday, actually, of the 8th Air Force. And they note that, if you see here on the left, in that Stars and Stripes article. In contrast to the 12 B-17s they put up for that one, I'm sorry, I'm thinking the first raid. But anyway, that first raid, now you're talking, 0 airplanes in January 28th of 42. to 1,200 plus, bombing the Martian yards in Cologne. And this was no milk run. In fact, Robert says here that he witnessed another plane right next to him get hit in number one engine, take a direct hit and blow up. And he said it was a bit more personal because one of the people who'd gone through OTU, Operational Training Unit, at Chatham Field here in Georgia with them was on that plane. And so, again, this whole like, oh gosh, am I next? Just wondering, if the next flak person has got their name on it. And I think he closed it with quite an understatement. Don't want any more like this one. Another one of his missions, just a couple later, mission number 8, February 3rd, 1945, which was one that was depicted in Masters of the Air when, spoiler alert, Rosie Rosenthal was shot down. Up to that point, the largest daylight raid on Berlin. Somewhere north of like 1,400 bombers took part. And they were on this one. And he says something to the effect here of, I'd say I'd admit when the flak was getting to me. Well, I'm admitting. Obviously, probably the most heavily defended target in the Reich. I mean, it's the capital after all. And it was through the very, very end of the war. If I remember my stats correctly, 36 bombers were shot down on that raid, including one from the 92nd. Now, again, this was out of a huge force, but, you still see a flak-filled sky. That's going to give anyone, even the veterans who were, maybe flying since latter part of 43, some trepidation. And some of the other artifacts they have, these great pictures of him. I mean, this is just scratching the surface, but on the left, right after he enlisted in the Air Corps, and over on the right side, him in flight gear in training kind of gives a good picture of what he would have been wearing. Just add a basic chest pack parachute to that, and you oxygen mask, you've got it. And his letters home. So it was, again, great to have all this to really start to work with, to get to know this guy, really. Not just, where he was and where he did his training, but what he was like as a person. You get these shades of their personality through reading all these letters and diary entries. Now, his pilot was Erwin Schmidt, born in Toledo, Ohio in May of 1923. Again, 21, going on 22 years old by the time they get to the battlefront. He was quite tall. For a pilot, even by today's standards, he was almost 6'4". If I remember correctly, on his draft registration, it said he was actually 6'3.5". So I cannot imagine this guy just clambering through the cockpit of a 24 or a 17.
Bendy legs, I think it's fair to say. Flexible, double jointed knees or something. Yeah.
And by the way, a little sidebar here. Everyone thinks that you have to be the shortest member of the crew to be a ball turret gunner. Not so. I met a ball turret gunner who was fully 6 feet tall. And one of our docents here, his dad was almost 6'1" as a ball turret gunner. So you did have people who were a bit on the taller side, even by today's standards, but certainly by 1943, 44, 45 standards in these positions. So again, he had to make this transition, from 24s to 17s. And what they did was they actually broke up the crew as well as 3 other crews that got to the 92nd at the same time. All had been B-24 crews, and they put them with veteran crews so they could get their feet wet. And Erwin flew all 3 combat missions as a co-pilot and a handful of training flights, maybe a few dozen hours total. And then they decided, okay, you're ready to get your crew back and take the helm of a up to that point, completely new airplane. He'd never been, to my understanding, behind the controls of the B-17 before this point. And he'd flown about 19 missions by March 3rd of 45, again, flying at different intervals from each other. Now, I've alluded to this date a couple times. On that day, there was an incident. On the way back home from a mission to Ruhlen in Chemnitz, Germany, while these B-17s were flying in formation, 2 suffered a mid-air collision over Forchevel Marsh, Belgium, the very same place of that memorial that I began this presentation with. And essentially, they say that a B-17, one of the 17s hit prop wash, doesn't really make clear who. Prop wash, probably more accurately described wingtip vortices, was a disturbance of air behind your propellers that could almost the closest thing I would say it could create would be almost like turbulence. Having not experienced it myself, I think maybe some pilots could, if there's any pilots here, could speak to it. It was most hazardous, most common on takeoff, taxiing, and landing, but also could be an issue in close quarter flying, just like they were doing in the combat box formations. And essentially, one B-17 that was over Erwin's collided with his around the radio room, broke the plane into 3 pieces, and sent them hurling toward the earth, about 17,000 feet at that point. One crew member on that upper aircraft, Walter Gunner Marshall Dellinger from Shenandoah, Virginia, was killed when his parachute failed to open. And all but one of Erwin's 9-man crew perished. And the accident report is really terse. It really doesn't give us anything definitive. In fact, it just sums it up as the responsibility for the accident is assessed 100% due to causes undetermined. And my presentation is not meant to be, this isn't meant to be like an NTSB style investigation about what happened. They're just simply answers to questions we will never get over 80 years later. But it spelled disaster that day. Before we keep moving, are there any other questions that we want to address?
No, but people have been kind of answering them themselves as they've been going on there, some of the specifications about things. But no, we're good. It's people are engrossed, I think, so which is good.
All right. So now this is a good depiction not only of 92nd Bomb Group aircraft in formation, right? They were the Triangle B, that was their tail code. But the one indicated by the arrow is the very same fortress that Erwin was flying the day of that incident. And that was taken, this photograph was taken about a week and a half prior to the incident. So very close to when it happened. And just a few months later, in June of 1945, the survivors of the Schmidt crew, as well as some of the family of those who were lost, met in Baltimore, Maryland, to really just process their grief and what they'd gone through. Now, there was only one survivor of the Schmidt crew that particular day on March 3rd of 45, but as I mentioned, they would rotate out crew members. The original navigator, Christian Bozes, who was in that picture on the B-24 with the crew all together, he's standing on the far left with his officer's cap on, and it just so happened at the last minute, he was pulled to be in the deputy lead aircraft of the formation. And he apparently hoot and hollered about it. Did not want to be taken away from his crew. These were his buddies, right? Crews were, they got really, really close. Unsurprisingly, but that's the guys he wanted to fly with. So he tried, he begged to be put back on their crew that day, but they said, nope, we're training you up to probably become a lead navigator. He was clearly good at what he did. That's why he was in the deputy lead aircraft. But it's what saved his life ultimately. And he's here with his mother Elsie Bozes, Christian Bozes, and Elsie Bozes she's standing directly in front of him. They were from Baltimore. And in the center, with his sergeant stripes showing, is the tail gunner, Edward Bill Bartley, the sole survivor of the crew that day. Now, obviously, just by that fact alone, an extremely lucky man. But I did not realize how lucky until I found this article clipping featured on the left side, where essentially what happened was when they were struck, severed the plane essentially in two, and he was trapped in the tail section. And he described, actually, he gave an account of this because he passed, I think, 2013, where they had a chest pack style parachute. And a lot of times they would just for movement's sake, set it off to the side, whether, on their side, or in his case, he said, I put them on top of the tail guns. And they would kind of, just kind of hold them in place. And, because obviously there was always a risk of German interceptors. There were German fighters intercepting Allied bombers all the way through April 45, but it was much rarer. So he left us sitting on the guns. They were hit without warning. And when the tail nosed down, right, tail side first, hurling toward the earth, the parachute pack rolled forward on the guns, just outside of reach. And he's clamoring, just trying to, somehow get it. I'm sure centrifugal forces trying to get it onto his person. And it sounds, the way he describes it, that at some point during the free fall, the tail turned up in such a way that it fell back onto him. He was able to clip it on and pull his ripcord at 700 feet. I mean, as close to a close call as you can get. He's lucky that the parachute even opened at that altitude, and falling that fast. And he broke an ankle when he landed, but he was otherwise uninjured.
I have to share, you may know this already, but we've got the granddaughter of Elsie in the sidebar now, JCB project, that her father is Christian Bosey's.
Yes, Janelle. Yes, she
probably knew that was going to happen. But for us in the summer, I love my job. But when we have those direct connections, when someone in the sidebar just chirps in and says, "That was my granddad," or I knew that person, it makes the hairs I don't have on the back of my head stand up. So as Jim Wall says, gold dust in the sidebar today. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Janelle, for joining. There might be some other families here that are joining.
Superb.
I'll mention this later on, but I would not have been able to do this without the families. They've been just incredible through this whole journey. So anyways, so this is in the middle, next to Bill Bartley, is his mother, Loretta Bartley. Flanking them on either side is the parents of co-pilot William Billy Dalton, Minnie and William K. Dalton. And over to the far right, standing in front, is Norma Allen, Erwin Schmidt's mother, and his stepfather, Harold Allen, behind her. So among the other artifacts, among all those incredible artifacts that the Deignan family had, the combat diary of Roberts and letters and pictures, was a letter from February 7th of 1946 from Norma Allen, Erwin, the pilot's mother, to Anna Deignan, Robert Deignan, flight engineer's mother. And it's, I think, an 8-page letter. I mean, these were mothers united. Actually, they started to correspond while they were still in training. That they were able to get each other's names and everything, and like, hey, how's your boys doing? Just checking in on each other. And of course, we're bound together by this shared grief. She writes, every time I get a letter from one of the mothers, it seems so close to me as they do pertain to our loved ones. Right? These are the people who knew what they were feeling best and most intimately. This incredible, completely unimaginable sense of loss. And she mentions here, we just didn't realize what they were going through. They couldn't tell us, had to keep it all to themselves, right? They couldn't express themselves all that openly in these letters because they were censored. But I think also, even for those whose War II ancestors were lucky to come home, that's such a familiar sentiment that they just didn't want to tell us. I mean, how many times have we heard a version of that? And whenever they come to, say, a battlefield tour or to the museum here, when they just start to the floodgates open, right? It's like it's almost like you get the key and unlock the memories. So that's a picture on the right of Norma with her two boys. Erwin, the taller one, you can see how he became again almost 6'4", and his younger brother Robert Schmidt. And the Deignan family felt that this letter, as heart-wrenching as it was, should end up, whether a scan or the original, in the possession of the Schmidt family, if there were any that were interested. And I said, sure, I'd look into it, do a little searching around, and maybe there was a cousin or again a grandniece or nephew, because he didn't marry, didn't have any children of his own. But I did some digging, and I found out that little Robert Schmidt there became Dr. Robert Schmidt, MD, and lived to be 96 and a half years old. He served in the Navy World War II, was quickly discharged actually after his brother's death, which I thought was interesting. In his own obituary, it lists the fact that his only sibling, Erwin Schmidt, was killed flying B-17s. And he led an incredibly accomplished life. I mean, he became a pathologist, retired from the University of Michigan medical faculty. Very accomplished man, but it said something. It was really, really obviously incredible to read in his obituary about his brother, who, of course, he always remembered, but to make mention of that in his,
it's almost like you're saying that he lived two lives in one. The fact he's mentioning his late brother is that he's sort of saying, I carried on with him with me, and we're both kind of going now, but he actually physically went 60 years earlier, whatever it would be, 80 years there. But
Right.
yeah, it's curious. Well, not curious. It's amazing that he mentioned it there, and
it really
yeah,
is
extraordinary.
Yeah. But of course I saw that and I'm like, okay, well, I know I've got the right family. And so further down the obituary, it listed his survivors, including his daughter, Amy. And, you know, I figured, okay, you know what, let me just plug her name into Google, see what comes back. And so I plugged it in and I found through a little more searching a number that at least said it was associated with her. I gave it a call and it rang through, left a message. So I knew it was at least an active number. And I figured worst comes to worst, some random person has a voicemail from a War II geek. But a few days later, I got a text and she said, yes, this is Amy. My father was Robert. My uncle was Erwin. You've reached the right family. Long story short, as she was texting me, she said, we are in Belgium and we'll be going to visit my uncle's grave tomorrow at Ardennes American Cemetery. I'll take any and all pictures you'd like. And I was just ecstatic. I mean, I couldn't believe, you know, like, I mean, and it was so quickly that she got back to me. And just a willingness to like, yeah, okay, yeah, you know, this is, you know, the real thing. So I called the Deignan family up and they were ecstatic to hear this because he's also buried there. And it just so happened the day they went was Memorial Day 2023. I mean, it was just like, I mean, the timing, I still can't believe it. So on that day in 2023, she took these pictures. Her uncle Erwin on the left with the Omaha Beach sand engraving to really kind of, you know, bring out that the text, and his flight engineer Robert Deignan on the right. And so we got to talking, and Amy said, yeah, we have some things of Erwin's that might be of interest to the Deignans. Do you have an address for them? I said, I do, yeah. But I was curious. I noticed that your area code, your phone area code is Indianapolis, Indiana area. They're in Speedway, Indiana. I don't know where that is in relation to you. And she's like, oh my gosh, that's 20 minutes away. So right after they got back from their trip to Belgium, the two families met and swapped their shared histories. That's Amy, again, Erwin's niece on the left. Lee, Robert's grandniece, Robert Deignan's grandniece, with her back to us on the right. You can just kind of see the person who's actually taking the picture. That's Lee's daughter, Katie, Robert's great-grandniece, and a couple other family members. Just amazing to see this history come alive and see how much it mattered to them all these years later. And I think Amy was really underselling it when she said we have some of Erwin's things. They have his entire footlocker. You know, basically was packed up and shipped home and essentially kept in a you know, out of the way but safe place for 8 decades. There's pictures of him all the way from his training. That top left one, he's in front of a PT-17 Stearman trainer. We have one of those aircraft actually at the museum, all the way up until his arrival at RAF Podington in Bedfordshire, England. And that last picture, with him kneeling in front of the concertina wire, that was taken roughly a month before he lost his life. And they also had his mission notes, which were, like a lot of pilots, much more straight and to the point. You know, the mission number, the date, the target, position, formation, that sort of thing. And on the right, Erwin's last will and testament, which came into effect far, far too soon. They also had a letter from February 4th, 1946, from Anna Deignan to Norma Allen. That letter I showed before, this is the immediate previous letter in that chain of correspondence between the mothers. Amazing that these families kept these letters 80 years, and now you can see the conversation happening between them. And, you know, she mentions, writes, it's a comfort to know they are laid at rest in the same place, in their case, Ardennes American Cemetery. And she adds, I'll be glad when all the boys are back. Those homecoming parties are hard to go to. Right, they're already dealing with trying to process the losses they've suffered, but they each still have a son in the service, right? Robert Schmidt was in the Navy and was soon to be discharged, but you know, obviously still pretty anxious to get him home. And Werner Deignan, Robert Deignan's older brother, was a pilot with the 15th Air Force in Italy, a P-38 pilot. So he was hardly out of harm's way before actually they both did end up coming home. And she closes, we get all we can. We know Bob, their late son Robert Deignan, would want us to, is try to carry on after an unimaginable tragedy. And that's a picture on the right of Anna on her wedding day in about 1920. Now, Richard, the third airman in the title of my presentation, how does he factor into this? Well, he was born February 3rd, 1923 in St. Louis. He trained on 24s, but was assigned to B-17s, kind of an odd duck sort of situation, and arrived at RF Podington in December 44, began flying in January 45. He flew 8 missions as a co-pilot before getting the helm of the B-17, and logged 30 by the war's end, including the 8th Air Force's final combat mission to Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, April 25th, 45, which, by the way, was not a milk run. I had no idea about this mission really before, but when I looked into it, essentially, it was a weird case where, because it checked for allies, the only time they actually radioed prior warning on the, I think it was on the BBC, but to hopefully any Czechs who had radios so that they could get out of harm's way. Let's see. I was just making sure it hadn't frozen here. So anyway, so they radioed prior warning to get so they could hopefully get out of the way. But of course, the Germans picked it up, and they have all their guns ready. And because of the nature of the mission, it was a visual-only mission, right? They could not use radar bombing even if they wanted to. And so these planes mostly had to make 2, 3, sometimes 4 bomb runs over the target before dropping their payload through increasingly accurate flak. So I actually came to know Richard, of all things, while I was grocery shopping. He looked like a guy of a certain age who was using an electric shopping cart, and he was wearing this cap, the Commemorative Air Force. I'm sure a lot of you all know. They're the ones who keep the old warbirds flying, right? Yep. And actually, I have a couple here in just a few months. I'm very much looking forward to that. But that's him actually in front of a Commemorative Air Force B-24. And on that top photo, he's the one standing second from the right. He's the last surviving member of his crew in that photo, obviously. I met him, saw the cap, asked him if he was in the service, because I just kind of wondered. And he said, oh, yeah, I was in the Army Air Corps. So that told me what era we're talking. And we got to be fast friends, and I kind of started to pick his brain about the war and life in general. Fascinating guy. It occurred to me, though, I met him again while grocery shopping. And separately, I had begun on this research on the Schmidt crew through my coworker, Robert Deignan's relative, who I met through work. 2 separate threads here, kind of research threads. But it occurred to me that Richard was flying with the same group at the same time. And so I wonder, okay, what do you remember anything about this? And so I called him up one day. I said, hey, Richard, I was wondering if you remember anything about a collision in early March of 1945 between 2 B-17s. I said, you weren't on this mission, but I was just curious. So I made sure to not, say an exact date. I didn't give him any names or any other information. I didn't want it to be any lead him anywhere by accident. And he thought for a few seconds, and he said, well, I seem to remember, yeah, there was a pilot I knew, Erwin Schmidt, who was involved in something like that. Just pulled it right out, 78 years later at this point, the name. And he explained that, the connection was a bit closer than I would have realized. 4 crews were assigned to the 92nd Bomb Group December 1st of 44, 1 to each squadron. Crew number 13 was a Schmidt crew, along with Robert Deignan, indicated by those yellow dashes. Crew number 14 was a Weimar crew. They were this group of 4, again, former B-24 pilots, assigned to the 92nd, and now retrained. And so Richard said they were put into this kind of intensive reorientation course with the other pilots, and didn't spend a whole lot of time together, but they were these kind of odd ones out relative to the rest of the group. And I asked him, well, I know your time with him was brief, but was there anything about Erwin that stands out in particular? He said, yeah, I seem to remember he was really tall. Yeah, so I guess almost 6'4". So I guess really, really fascinating just to find this living link to this history, and just really by happenstance. And in 2022, we actually made a visit, me, Richard, and his daughter Kim, who flew all the way from California to the Mighty Eighth. And it was just great. Obviously, we roll out the red carpet for any time a World War II veteran, whether they were 8th Air Force or otherwise, come here, and especially since it's such a rarity today. Now, this wasn't just some little trip from Florida, about 3 hours away, where we were coming from, to Savannah area and back. No, this was Richard's first stop on a cross-country move from Florida to California at 99 years old. Just amazing. And I'm happy to report that Richard is still with us. He just turned 103 years old, I guess a couple weeks ago. Still sharp as could be. We talk regularly. And this was a picture taken when I visited him in San Diego, where he and his daughter now live, and when we were watching Masters of the Air. And it was very interesting getting his thoughts. We watched up to that point, I think the first 4 episodes were out, and getting his notes on it. And he did have notes.
Oh, I bet.
The thing is, he overall, he really enjoyed it. I think he said, I think overall, it really gets it right. But one of the things that he commented on, I remember this, was during the when there's for those of you who've seen it, and this is based in fact, that the officers had a bicycle race through the mess hall and through the barracks and around to the runway, the flight line. And Richard, kind of clutching his pearls, he's like, "You would never find us officers doing that. That's not how we behaved." And I said, well, maybe it was a little bit different in 43, than when you got there at 44, 45. But it was very interesting. And he commented, I think, in the real case where the rest of formation slowed down when Curtis Biddick's plane is hit, slowed down the formation to not leave him as a straggler. He said they shouldn't have done that. And that was understood like doctrine at the time. And it worked out well for the 100th. I mean, they did, he got back large part, I guess, for that mission because of it. But he said, nope, that shouldn't, they shouldn't have done that.
It's one of those things that probably shouldn't work more times than it would work, and that was the occasion when it kind of did work. But yeah.
And I'm not passing judgment, by the way. I mean, for me, it's like, well, gosh, no, yeah, I wouldn't want to lose my buddies, And I mean, if we're on the tail end, sure, yeah, maybe we can, bump it down, 20, knots or whatever the airspeed would be. But that was his.
It's that thing you were saying earlier about the average age being 22. I mean, by definition, these guys, despite the fact they're well trained to be follow orders, they're 22. They're instinctive. I mean, I can't barely remember being 22, but I know I did things I shouldn't have done because your 22-year-old brain is saying it doesn't matter. Jump that fence after 5 pints, it'll be fine. The 57-year-old me, as I will be next week, kind of tells me, no, don't do that kind of stuff. See, I think it's, and I've known that with my veterans I've known myself, is that the elderly veteran looks at the young man he was and thinks, God, you were stupid back then, in a sort of self-critical way, but realizing it was because they were incredibly young. They weren't cynical and jaded. They were just they were living recklessly because that's the time they were in, and it was the needs had to be done. They've got to defeat an enemy, and we should admire that recklessness, even though sometimes we can go, oh, well, you shouldn't have done that. It's what got them in the aircraft in the first place. That what the hell attitude is what made them go back and back into the aircraft despite the odds you mentioned earlier on.
Exactly. I think that sort of attitude. And of course, when you're in the middle of it, whether in the ground with the infantry or in the air, like these guys, it's not to them, again, 20 something years old, about the USA and preserving democracy and everything. It's like, no, it's because my buddies are. It's because I don't want to let down my buddies. I have a job to do. and we have a job to finish. I think that's really the overwhelming sentiment that somebody had. And upon reflection, obviously, for those who were lucky like Richard to come home, it was about, this larger cause that we were a part of, defeating, an enemy that needs to be defeated. But that's not how really most of them are conceptualizing it. Think about how you were thinking about the world, however much or little you were at 19, 20 some odd years old. It's fascinating, yeah. So, and I'm hoping we're plan to hopefully make a visit to see him next month. You're really hoping to get over there to see him. So in the latter part of 2024, I was able to pay my respects to each of the Schmidt crew's casualties from March 3rd to 45. So the one that is not white marble, the flat granite marker, is out of William Dalton, Billy Dalton, the co-pilot. And his parents chose to repatriate his remains. There was, of course, the initial burials at any number of cemeteries overseas, and then they were consolidated into permanent cemeteries. But also families were given the option if they wanted to repatriate their remains, and that's exactly what they chose in 1948-49 when he came home. And so I was able to visit his resting place in Asheville, North Carolina. And then in the latter part of 2024, actually, I went on a trip to Belgium for the 80th commemoration of the Battle of the Bulge. My first stop was Ardennes American Cemetery on my way over, because near just a little bit southwest of Liège. And just incredible to go here, to now go to the final resting place of these men. Barely though, young men who I've been, coming to know their stories for already a couple of years by that point. And on my way back, just as I wrapped up that trip for the 80th commemoration of the Bulge, I stopped in this little suburb of Charleroi, Forchet-la-Marche, Belgium. The same memorial I began this presentation with, the site of the crash of the incident. Again, a pretty important milestone in this research to actually go to those places, because I know I'm preaching to the choir here about the power of the place, about being there where this occurred. And the thing is, right, the disadvantage with the air war is you can't go to where they were unless you have, I guess, a connecting flight that happens to take you on some portion of the flight path they would have had then. You can't go to where they were, right? This is, the closest that you have to, say, a foxhole. That or if there was maybe some damage done to the ground, that still, bears a scar.
We've discussed it on the channel, the in a sense abstract nature of memorializing the air war, a bit like memorializing the sea war. Right. I think it's American historian Vince O'Hara went to Casablanca once to give a lecture about the sea battle, and just kind of stood at the hotel, kind of pointing at the grey sea out there, saying, "Well, 10 miles that way was this ship, and 15 miles that way was this ship." And interestingly, normally where I am, we memorialize the efforts of strategic bombing by the losses of the crews. There are no monuments to the efforts of them because it would be weird because of the loss of life that was occurred. Right. So, you don't sort of see that, but you do see that here's where this crew, here's where this RAF Wellington came down, here's where this B17 came. So it's a sort of it's not an abstract way in terms of memorializing the individuals, but it's an abstract way of remembering the campaign, because it's shown through loss, whereas the ground campaign is often commemorated through liberation. This town was liberated on the. You don't get that. You don't get air war monuments of that type because it wouldn't make any sense. So it's interesting in this world when we have these discussions about how we're looking back at World War II. We can talk about maybe the museum later on. Is that the ground war and the air war? Historians may look at them in a similar way, but the way they are commemorated in the places where they occurred are very different because of the nature of how the fighting was. As you say, it's about crashes and crew loss. So it's fascinating.
Right, it is, yeah. And the thing is, I kind of to your point, I think really, the best comparison is, I mean, one of the other, fields of combat is the sea. I went, it's a whole other story, but to the Philippines actually just a couple months ago with my family, and we obviously went to some battle sites. Corregidor, oh my gosh, I cannot recommend more highly traveling there. William, the guide that we had, I want to give him a shout out. He was one of the best guides I've ever had. I like to think I have a pretty high standard for that, being a guide myself. But we went to one area in the southeastern Philippines, near Mindanao, actually. It looks out into toward Leyte Gulf. We actually flew over Leyte Gulf and out to the sea off of Samar. And I'm sure most people here have heard the Battle off Samar, this climactic action in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, October 25th of -- where an outgunned American task force encountered they were jeep carriers and destroyers and destroyer escorts encountering battleships and cruisers. They had the advantage of aircraft, and I think that is an important point to make, that they did have a pretty key advantage in that direction. But I'm just I'm like, wow, somewhere about 100 or so miles out there is where that happened, right? And that's kind of my moment, like, wow, that's closest that I can get to at least being in that area and seeing where this momentous point in naval history occurred. It is just so much. Trying to, I think, memorialize it is a tough thing. It is, and I've always been fascinated with how that process of memorialization and how that's done. So yeah, I think it is a good comparison. The air and the sea. How do you remember those sides?
Yeah. Thank you.
So, partly how we actually commemorate it. Actually, very a good segue here is our Flags for the Fallen program that I think I mentioned about earlier. This is just a small section of in the gardens where we set the 26,048 star flags, a flag under which, of course, they served to commemorate the 8th Airmen who did not come home. And so back this past flags in 2025, I staged a small memorial to the Schmidt crew. That's just 9 of 26,000 that were lost that day. Or excuse me, 9 lost that day of 26,000 total. So again, it really is maybe one of the best ways I can think of visualizing this. I kind of think of, I want to get over to Lincolnshire to see the RAF Bomber Command memorial there. I've heard that is very moving. And by the way, I think a lot of people realize this, that while when the British changed to nighttime bombing, ostensibly, again, hopefully to reduce casualties, if memory serves me correct, RAF Bomber Command had a 47% death rate. That is killed outright. And I met one Bomber Command veteran in Normandy, Cecil Chandler. He was a flight engineer on Halifax's and Lancaster's. Through 27 ops, and he was very lucky to have gotten through that. He got through completely unwounded, which was, I think, somewhere like a quarter, if that, of the RAF Bomber Command volunteers made it through without either being killed, wounded, captured, or what have you.
It's 55,700. Yeah, which is. When my cousin being one of them shot down over Germany, and this concept that nighttime bombing was easier. Well, it's or less dangerous. It's do you want to die by drowning or fire? Do you want to be shot in the head or had your head cut off with a sword or whatever? I'm being facetious there, but the losses are very broadly very similar. And the experiences are broadly very similar, and it's all part of that whole concept of strategic bombing being dangerous, whichever method you use to employ it. And I'm glad you've reinforced the idea that that things were still bad in early 1945. They weren't as bad as they had been in 43, but it's not like that they were coasting to victory now.
Right.
And indeed, neither were they on the ground. There's people that perceive that after the Battle of the Bulge, it's just a question of kind of mopping up the Germans. Well, tell that to the bloody battles all the way through Germany in March and April 45, where the Germans were fighting tooth and nail tenaciously for every stream, village, and street. So this idea that the war is getting close to being won, which it sort of is, but doesn't mean that the death has stopped. It's slowed down. Fantastic stuff.
Yeah. And within the last few months, really, I've been able to also visit the resting places of at least some of the survivors, or the survivors of, I should say, the Schmidt crew. Edward Bill Bartley on the left, and Christian Bosey's on the right, actually buried just miles apart in Baltimore, Maryland. And it's been amazing because I have just, again, gotten in touch with more family members of the crew. And it's just, I cannot really emphasize enough just how much I owe to them for trusting me to tell their family story and to continue to provide more of these irreplaceable firsthand resources to tell the stories with hopefully as much justice as possible. In fact, actually, just about 2 months ago, I had Janelle in the chat as well as Michelle.
They're both in the chat now. There's two of them there.
Great. So 2 of the 3 daughters, and I think it's Denise is the middle one. You guys can correct me on that. Who I think is planning to hopefully make a visit in the future. But the 2 daughters of Christian Bosey's came by the museum. First time ever to the museum, which is always special. But now to get to tour people who are part of a project has been such an important part of my life as a historian was just wonderful. I hadn't seen this picture of Christian before. I mean, it is just like I said. I was joking to them that that Paul Newman could have played their dad in the movie. I think maybe the chat's got some other opinions, but just a great.
Well, he's got a bit of a Jimmy Stewart about him as well.
Jimmy Stewart, yeah.
And what's when they made the movie in the 40s, Jimmy Stewart. They make it in the 60s, Paul Newman. That would be the way.
Right.
Yeah, and if they make it now, who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. And what's interesting too is that actually they were able to add a bit. One of the little interesting just bits of trivia with the crew. So Erwin Schmidt, 6'3" and change. Billy Dalton was 6'1". Christian Bosey's navigator was an even 6 foot. And I'm thinking they might have had very well the tallest average height of any officers in the crew, in the same crew in the 8th Air Force. But they brought along his artifacts. They have a whole chest full of artifacts. And so on the left, that's a picture actually of him in Baltimore the same day, probably just either minutes before or after that group photo of the people, the families and survivors getting together. A ID bracelet that he wore through, to my understanding, all of his missions as a good luck charm. It even has Mizpah on the back, God is with me, if I remember the Hebrew translation correct. And his mission notes. And he had quite the font. I mean, I think I saw a comment about cursive being a lost art. I was just amazed by the variety. And he's 20, going on 21 years old, writing this. But a totally different font for the mission there, right? The date, the actual text itself. And what's interesting is that this February 9th, 1945 mission, his 14th mission with another crew, it just so happened it was his 21st birthday. And there was an unwritten rule. I don't know if this was the case with Bomber Command, or really the other numbered Air Force for that matter, but there was at least an unwritten rule in the 8th that you did not have to fly a mission on your birthday. So Richard, he would have, his 22nd birthday was the date of the massive Berlin raid on 45, and he didn't fly that day. Again, because it was his birthday, but because they were short of navigators, and again, he clearly was a gifted navigator. they were grooming him to become a lead navigator, from what it seems. They said, nope, you're flying. And I think in the latter part of his diary entry, he says something to the effect of, well, I guess I'm a man today. I mean, you can just tell the tone that he would have been using, writing this down. They like had a shot afterwards. Well, I guess I'm a man today. What a birthday it was. So, and within actually the last few months, I was also very fortunate to make a home for William Dalton, the co-pilot's Purple Heart and Air Medal. Actually, Eric Gaillet, who is in the chat, who I cannot thank enough. Also, he was the driving force behind the memorial that you see at Fort La Marche, and has written a book about it. Has done a lot of legwork before I ever came along. He saw on a Facebook group someone who dealer and collector in France who was had these medals and had the digital research and was looking to make a deal. And so he tagged me in it. Eric tagged me in this, and myself and the collector got in touch. And I explained to him, I was like, I'm going to show my cards. This is a very special crew to me, and it would be really wonderful to preserve this. Unfortunately, we were able to work that out, and I've since made a home for them. Amazing to see. I don't have it pictured here, but the Purple Heart actually is still in the original box that it was mailed in, addressed to home in Asheville, which you don't find very often. No. Right? How often do you keep the actual packaging for anything? But for this, I think it must have, to the Dalton family, been something else entirely. He was a Clemson graduate from Clemson College, all boys military school at the time, now Clemson University. Go Tigers, by the way. I got some family there. But he ended up becoming co-pilot, and again, clearly very gifted aviator. It seemed like he could very well have made first pilot had he lived long enough. And since then, I also made a return visit to William Dalton's gravesite, brought his medals with him, with me. Felt it was appropriate to memorialize him, and you kind of see more closely now the very unique etching that this marker has, and it has all the way down to his squadron, and it says killed in action over Germany. Of course, it was lost over Belgium, but I think the records, maybe it said Germany at one point, and actually an engraving of a B-17. I've never seen anything like this, and I've been to many veterans resting places, so it's very unique to see.
Yeah, I've never seen that. Amazing.
Yeah, and so actually, just about 2 months ago now, I was able to contact Billy Dalton's 96-year-old younger brother, Charles Dalton, who lives in Florida. So we got together, and I told him, of course, my connection. They've been so gracious, him and his family, to allow me, because I said, if you all would like the medals, I feel this is this is your call ultimately. This is your kin. And they said no. That they felt that I could preserve them to tell their story, which I'm very grateful for. And he was about 15 years old when Charles was, when his brother was killed, and he had unearthed this incredible portrait. I've got him, of course, holding the picture and a close-up there. Again, just to me, like almost like a movie kind of image of an aviator. I mean, he's got, he's looking sharp with his silver wing. Clearly, very proud of them. He's got his, I think his probably Clemson class ring on, maybe high school class ring, personal bracelet, and a cigarette dangling in hand.
I'm seeing Robert Conrad there,
I think Robert Conrad is a very good comparison. Yeah.
I mean, one of those guys, ridiculously good looking. The people that I was jealous of when I was that age, because I didn't look like that.
Right. Yeah. And of course, he's
Hollywood would have been calling.
And what's amazing is that actually there was 4 children in the Dalton family, and all of them end up in aviation in some capacity or another. Of course, Billy, the eldest, Army Air Force pilot, killed in action. Charles actually was a career Navy officer and aviator. I think he had somewhere north of 5,000 hours, and I don't even know how many carrier landings. Very skilled pilot. Sister, I believe, is Catherine. She was a flight attendant with Delta, and then actually got her own pilot's license, which was very uncommon, because we're talking probably 1960s at that time. And then the youngest brother, Wendell Dalton, was a Misty pilot in Vietnam. They were the forward air control pilots, extremely dangerous missions. He was awarded, if memory serves me correctly, 2 Silver Stars for his service. So pretty amazing. The Dalton family, they were bound to be aviators.
Yeah.
And if you want to check out, the current activity of the 92nd Group. So again, the Memorial Association was dissolved in I think 2007 because of flagging membership. These veterans, getting older and passing away. But actually, just recently, the 92nd Bomb Group Historical Society has been formed. Dan Whitlock, he's done some amazing work to preserve their story, and they're actually in the process of opening a base museum. For those of you guys in East Anglia or have been that way, our Podington is now Santa Pod Raceway. It's a drag strip, drag racing strip. But they have graciously set aside, they've worked out, some area to have a small museum to talk about the heritage of the 92nd there. So I highly recommend you check out their stuff. They've got a very active Facebook page and the website here. That's where I got this shirt. All proceeds, go to the opening of the museum. And also, if there's anyone here who has artifacts, obviously I would say please think about the museum first and foremost, but also the 92nd Bomb Group, their museum. Fingers crossed that it opens. I think would be a great home. Where they actually served from. So absolutely. And special thanks. I mean, this is just the short list. There's so many people to thank here. Lee and Katie Butera, Robert Deignan's grandniece and great-grandniece, Amy Erwin Schmidt's niece, Rob Hutchinson, Candy Kyler Brown, the 92nd Bomb Group, Memorial Association, now Historical Society, especially Candy. My gosh, if any of you here have a 92nd connection, reach out to Candy. She is like one of the best, most diligent and quickest researchers I have ever had the privilege of knowing. And I mean, anytime I had a question about one of these missions or the airmen, she could not get it to me quicker. And her father, John Kyler, was with the 407 Squadron, same as Richard Waymire with 92nd Bomb Group, was shot down, became a POW. She's retraced his footsteps, has a book that talks about that journey. And also her dad's vest that he wove as a POW, and he took with him on the Long March from Stalag Luft 4 West.
Oh, amazing.
Is here in the museum. Yeah, it's here on display in the museum, Eric Gaillet, again, I am so indebted to him for all the work that he's done and continues to do. Next time I'm over in Belgium, we'll have to get together. But they've been so helpful. And of course, Kim and Richard Waymire, Fame's favorite few. One of Richard's last surviving pilot, to my understanding. I hope I'm wrong, but of Fame's favorite few. And also, again, the Bosey's family here, the Dalton family, all these others who've since this point lent so much help to bringing these stories alive.
Well, thank you very much, Sean. We just had a comment came in that kind of encapsulates what I was kind of going to say to you now about remembrance and so I'll just read what he said. This has been like a microcosm of the wider subject. Some of us pranging on about engines and arms before remembering the human family experiences are the reason we maintain interest. I mean, that's the kind of thing you should put on the front of a museum brochure, because obviously with a museum like yours, there are the people who go there who want to see B-17s, they want to see the A2 jackets, they want to see that paraphernalia of war. But that's in some ways not, although it's a core market, it's not the market that is sort of the one that I'm assuming museums really focus on. It's the people, it's creating a wider interest. And you could rattle off a lot of dates of movements, and this bomb group arrived at this, as I said earlier, this bomb group arrived at this airfield at so-and-so date, and they flew this number of missions. This one here was scrubbed, and the cloud cover was at so-and-so. This one here was a slightly lower altitude than that one there. This, and everyone's going to glaze off, and well, most people will. These are the stories that it's perfect synchronicity, because we can feel your enthusiasm for sharing it with us, that brings the families into it, for them to have their understanding of what their loved ones who may or may not have made it through the war went through. And then the viewer and the people who visit the museum then have that direct shortcut to understanding really what it's all about. Because it's not a, yes, it's important in terms of the broad history that the B-17F didn't have the chin turret and the B-17G, that kind of thing. But that isn't what brings people back. That isn't what makes a family have a day out that they will talk about, hopefully, for years to come. So how are you, I mean, it's a big question, we can spend it all night all day on this, but how are you bridging that gap of the veterans are passing away, the family members maybe don't know things, it's a generation where everything's available on their gadgets immediately. How is a museum like you, which is 30 years old, which isn't, I'm from near London, mate. Our museums are several hundred years old. Yours is an absolute infant, it's barely walking yet. But how are you looking at the future? How will storytelling change, and what will the museum do? You say you've got this expansion plan or improvement for 2028. What are the challenges you face?
Yeah, so great question. I mean, and for one thing, again, beautifully put with the microcosm, that comment. I think that really does.
It's a great comment. Yeah.
Yeah, really well done, Matt. I think for the
Matt.
Man, but anyway, yeah, that's the thing. It is a period of transition, and some of it, I think we are, we've only known, for those of us here today, the World War II generation with us, in the amount of living memory, and they still are. It is, it's unfortunately, not for too much longer. I hope as long as possible, but that's just reality of life.
Yeah.
But I think we've really tried to emphasize more the legacy side of it. The heirs of the 8th. That's actually, if you have a family member who served with the 8th Air Force, we have a special membership called Heir of the 8th, HEIR. We're really emphasizing more, that so many of how many people I've come across that it's their first visit to the museum, and they just happen to see it on the side of 95. Like, oh, we've been meaning to stop here for years, just check it out. Because my dad was with the 8th, or uncle was with the 8th, or what have you, or people who really had no idea, and Dad, we don't know what he did. We heard something about the 8th, or that he was navigator, maybe he was with the 8th, I'm not sure, and they want to learn more, and so we've really been. I got to credit our marketing director, especially Dawn, with really expanding our reach on social media. And using that tool, which we used before, but I think she's really built upon it, to let families know that we are we want visitors of all backgrounds, whether or not you have 8th Air Force connection, coming through our doors. But especially if you do, we are a repository for that. We are your resource. For finding out hopefully your ancestor story. We want to do that as best as possible. Fortunately, on my side of things, especially with tours, we have some excellent docents. A number of them do have 8th Air Force connections. A lot of them do not. Right. It is just a mixed bag of those who do have the personal connection and are history geeks, and are who are just history geeks, just in general. We've done a lot of outreach with local schools. I've done a program that my manager Heather had done previously, History on Wheels, where we go to schools and you'll give like a little 20-minute crash course on a particular subject. Actually, that one I'm more focused 15th Air Force on the Tuskegee Airmen, because in 5th grade curriculum in both Georgia and South Carolina is when they're learning about World War II. So really, just emphasizing that we have this this cultural institution here. That we want everyone to know that that this is your story, not just that of airmen in black and white photos, from 80 years ago. Whether or not you have a connection to them, I mean, that's important by itself, but that this is part of a larger shared heritage. So really, just hammering as much as we can, social media outreach and also in person. Word of mouth is again, it sounds old fashioned, but it's everything. So again, opportunities like this, obviously, we want to spread the word. And
thank you. And I'm glad that a museum isn't just the in-person visit. The museum can reach people who aren't actually physically visiting the museum via social media, via that type of thing, and the online things and seminars and televise this and stream that is all part of it. And I think I'm finding it fascinating that we are moving through, as I recorded the podcast as a guest myself this afternoon. So I was in your shoes with a young lad in Britain called Jacob. And, I remember going to 8th Air Force reunions in East Anglia. We're talking about the mid 80s when I was sort of 14, 15, where they didn't need to have what the museum is explained to them. They would just go, oh, there's a picture of Jim. Look, there's a picture of me. There's a picture of Fred. They remember that Jeep there? Remember that there? There was no need to explain the whole purpose of it. It was simply like a class reunion, but those days, as you said, we've moved on from that now. But I think there are some great themes that air crews can share that are universal. That interdependability of an air crew. Mm-hmm. That if you're an infantry platoon on the ground, if you're not pulling your weight, you're not necessarily letting the other 29 or so people of that platoon down, because you can kind of hide. But on a B17 or B24 crew, if you're not pulling your weight, you're endangering the crew around you, who are endangering the box around you. And that, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but it's not a cliche. The fact that there's a Brooklyn cab driver who's the pilot, and the co-pilot is a chemical student from San Diego, and the tail gunner is a so-and-so. But I'm sure that is as true as many times as it isn't true, that the crews do represent these extraordinary mix of people from across the USA with, some are Catholics and some are Jewish and some are whatever it would be, those universal truths, I think are going to be the kind of the tools in your toolbox moving forward. And then this just, when to stand up as individuals for a greater cause, I think is a pretty damn important theme right now in the troubled world we live in.
Absolutely, yeah. That's the thing is I think it's the air crews, this I mean, it's a case, and not just with these on the ground too, and ships, at sea, during the war, but it's a cross section of America, of the United States, and all these different backgrounds. And I know one of the other surviving members of Famous Few, Al Arietta, I contacted him recently. He's 102 on 103 over in California. He's the son of Mexican immigrants. I'm sure that probably a lot of his crew had never met someone from with Mexican heritage before then. And but we all got to work together. That's a job. Just the same that the pilot from say North Carolina or Arkansas, wherever, had never met a Jewish person, but his navigator Katz, you rely on him, and it doesn't really matter. All of those differences kind of melt away. I think ultimately, for the most part, in the middle of this, and I think for people to see themselves, of course, I always try to do my best to bring in these personal stories, but to bring in commentary, from either those who didn't make it home or those who did, just that these kids of all ages, students of all ages, can relate to. This isn't just some abstract in the past, and it was so different then. No, it's not as different as you think. But I think there was a question here about Masters of the Air, and obviously we did have a little bit of a kind of a Masters bump, immediately leading up to it and afterwards, and we're really grateful for that. And we've had a lot of really continuing collaboration with the 100 Bomb Group Foundation and their overseas museum, at Thorpe Abbott's. We actually offer tours, educational tours that will take you over there to those former airfields and battle sites and. It didn't have, it's not like it was a Band of Brothers. I mean, Band of Brothers, I think, was so exceptional in so many ways of the moment when it came out. And that there were so many more veterans that were like, okay, well, now I guess it's time to talk. I mean, you have the 1-2 punch of Saving Private Ryan and that practically, and in all the video games, right? Ones I grew up on, that kind of put it back into the public's focus, and emphasize telling your story. These veterans, like, okay, you should tell your story, and I think it's Pacific. You had an element of it. I think the Pacific is a very underrated series, personally.
For me, it was a slow burn. For me, I appreciate in some ways more than Band of Brothers now, and that's despite the fact I knew some of the Easy Company guys. I know some of the actors who played them, but right. I love Band. It's that that band you like, where you like the album instantly. That was it for Band of Brothers. But the Pacific was that kind of like cult classic album that I didn't appreciate for several years, and I think it's just because it's a hard sell. It's just so the Pacific War was so graphic and violent, and I mean, Andreas is asking what your take on Masters of the Air was, and I mean, they're off to a tricky start because everyone's wearing masks half the time. There's not that continuity of the same. You have the characters are there, but they're moving around, the POW element. They didn't have that central kind of Dick Winters thing that the Band of Brothers could do. But the Masters, I think, we can't judge it yet. It's still relatively fresh. It was 2 years ago it came out. Now, crikey, it was 2 years ago, wasn't it? This time 2 years. Yeah, it has to be 2 years. It can't be 1 year.
Hard to believe.
Wow. But what was your take on it? As Andreas is saying, off the record, not speaking as a work at the museum.
No, and obviously, love to talk about it. I really did enjoy the series overall. I think it is, a worthy, unfortunately, probably end to that trilogy of the Spielberg Hanks, major World War II miniseries. It is, even as somebody who is, I mean, this is why I live and breathe, it's hard. It is hard to follow because, right, you're following one unit, but you're following so many different stories. I think it does a very good job of bridging those stories and the different layers of them and the multitude of experiences that just even a few dozen guys that we ultimately really see much of have over the course from 1943 to 45. I've got my notes. I mean, of course, it's like, okay, you got to make peace with the fact that they're not going to be able to have the chin turrets on the G models, like because CGI. I mean, the budget was already just like astronomical. I'd say kudos, for the fact that they built 2 full-scale B-17 models for it, and we were fortunately able to have for the 100th Bomb Group reunion here in 23. We had 2 veterans there, the late Greg John Lucky Luckadoo, and 102, still going strong, Jim Rasmussen, navigator with the 100th, as well as some commentary from the prop master. I can't remember his name right offhand. You probably know him. He's worked on a lot of these major productions, but just talking about the challenges of that, and you're like, okay, we have to build the whole thing. They were really great about working with us. We had a screening here of the 5th episode, Rosie Rosenthal's mission, that Munster mission. Actually, that's first mission, but one of his very first missions. And we had Nate Mann, who played Rosie here, as well as Kirk Sadusky, executive producer of the series, as well as for Band of Brothers and others. and Don Miller wrote Masters of the Air.
Yep.
And I think the real stars of the show, and I think they would say this too, 3 8th Air Force veterans, one of whom is still with us, Bruce Cook. He's 100, just up the road from us, actually. Ball turret gunner. Actually said it was pretty comfortable for him, the ball turret. Funny enough. And Ken Beckman and Gordon Fenwick, who both since passed, good friends. Just it was a great time. It was really an incredible night. And I really think, honestly, and I know that people can say, oh, you're a bit biased because you're at the museum. And I mean, I've got a picture of Rosie Rosenthal's crew behind me, Rosie's Riveters, his original plane. But I think episode 5 of Masters of the Air is one of the best pieces of World War II media ever made. I really think that even just as a standalone, it's great as part of the larger story. But I think the 5th episode is so well done. I think just a sense of dread that you have.
Yeah, no, I'm a 3 and 4 guy. To me, but I rewatched it again a few weeks ago, and my feelings are kind of on record. I felt the last 2 or 3 felt a bit rushed. And that was because of budget. I've spoken to John Orloff. I know John, and I know, I met Kirk, in fact, in Normandy in June. And, it's but I think my takeaway from it is in a few years' time, you put those early missions on and you want to get an understanding of what it was like to be in an aluminum, you would say, tube flying over hostile Europe in 43, 44. I think all the previous great movies, Memphis Belle, 12 O'Clock High, all those things there, as good as they were, nothing gave us that jarring, multi-sensory. And I'm completely not saying that watching that was anything like the experience of being in the aircraft, but it gave me an approximation of it that sort of chilled me to my bones. That's the sound, the vibrations, the muffled sound of their communication there. Those few minutes alone, I think that will stand it in good stead to be remembered, because I can't see anybody recreating those bits better. I mean,
absolutely. And again, and to their credit, I know that this is probably circulated around. Certainly, Lucky, who's a consultant on it, and expressed his that he was impressed with the finished product. But Lucky, Ken Beckman, who, by the way, flew 48 missions over 2 tours of duty as a lead navigator. Yeah, I was lucky enough to fly aboard a 17 with them in 2024. Just
fantastic.
Amazing. Just amazing, yeah. Most, as so many of them are, but just unassuming, down-to-earth, humble guys. Gordon Fenwick, radio operator, 35 missions. Bruce Cook, 35 missions. Ball turret gunner mostly. All of them said, in some way or another, it was like I was on another mission. They said that really the depiction of the combat itself, it was, I think you get, especially in episodes 3, 4.
Yeah.
They said, I mean, they gave it high marks, and honestly, I think enough said. I mean,
that's, I think
maybe.
Sorry to interrupt, but
no. I was gonna say, just whatever critiques folks have, which I think are well taken. I've got my critiques here and there. I mean, I think anyone who cares about history is going to ought to critique things made depicting history. But the gold rubber stamp is these veterans, the last.
Yeah, I mean, and I would have been. I think basically they got a lot more of the air stuff right than they got the ground stuff right. The romance that kind of didn't go anywhere. That was it romance, But
Right.
I would rather that they got the air stuff right. I'd rather it's that way round. If the ground stuff had been, been the good bit, the put into relationships, but the air stuff had been appalling, that wouldn't have been good. It was they got it. If they had to make a sacrifice of something, it was the characterization on the ground, I think. But the air stuff is outstanding. Put it on a big television, surround sound cranked up, and as accepting that it's not really like it, trying to kind of put yourself in the place of it, because that's the thing that I will never understand. How that those guys put their hands on there and hoisted themselves up in there and walked into that aircraft especially the early guys, the pioneer, and I mean pioneers in the sense that at 42, 43 in the 8th Air Force, you were pioneering. And it was still, I mean, as you said, it was no less dangerous inherently in 44, 45. But those guys, when you know that, you know, you wouldn't bet on yourself. You know the odds are against you, and yet they got in. I mean, I think episode 5 with Rosie kind of conveys that. You know, why the hell are they doing it? But anyway, what we'll do, I think, is I want to invite you back in the future and just talk more generally about the work with the museum and stuff. It's been great stuff. But as we're coming up to 2 hours and people have got to go and do other things, we will bring it into him. But Sean, it's been absolutely. I'm glad you reached out to me. Thank you so much for viewers and the family members there for adding all your stuff in there. It's been a great lively sidebar, but people have been really impressed by it, which is good. So tomorrow I have Leon on, who is one of the guys who gets to play with Spitfires most days at work, which is pretty cool. So we look at the company that has 3 2-seater Spitfires, keeps warbirds in the air in the UK. So a kind of part of our How to Be a Historian series in some ways, but that'd be a pretty good job, isn't it? Going to work and playing with Spitfires. Well, you've got a good job, Sean. I've got a good job, but I think playing with Spitfires every day probably just about.
I mean, yeah. It's like it doesn't get more perfect than that, but no, I want to say thank you so much for having me, Paul, and for all the questions. I'd love to come back on and talk more about what we have to come here at the museum, and just generally talk about.
Let's do it.
Air Force stuff. Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's do 8th Air Force stuff. So, folks, as always, don't forget to click like and subscribe. The link to the museum is in the description below. Actually, I'll throw out. I should have done it earlier, but I was mesmerized by the talk. That is, if you're watching on a phone or something, that is the QR code that takes you straight to the museum. Consider become a channel member, buy my guests' books, read their blogs, go to their museums, follow their stories elsewhere, because that way they will create more history for us and we can invite them back to talk about their next project. So there you are. Dennis sums it up. This has been one of the outstanding shows of World War II TV, and that's a high bar. Thanks. There we are.
I'm flattered. Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. So cheers, everybody. I will see you all again tomorrow. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, viewers. Bye.
All right, thank you, Paul. Bye-bye.